Read a chapter out of Psalm just to start us off here. We're going to do Psalm 10, and this is a prayer for the overthrow of the wicked. Why dost thou stand afar off, O Lord? Why dost thou hide thyself in times of trouble? In pride the wicked hotly pursue the afflicted. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire, and the greedy man curses and spurns the Lord. The wicked in the haughtiness of his countenance does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Thy judgments are on high, out of his sight. As for all his adversaries, he snorts at them. He says to himself, I shall not be moved. Throughout all generations, I shall not be in adversity. His mouth is full of curses and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is mischief and wickedness. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the hiding places he kills the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the unfortunate. He lurks in a hiding place as a lion in his lair. He lurks to catch the afflicted. He catches the afflicted when he draws him into his net. He crouches, he bows down, and the unfortunate fall by his mighty ones. He says to himself, God has forgotten, he has hidden his face, he will never see it. Arise, O Lord our God, lift up thy hand, do not forget the afflicted. Why has the wicked spurned God? He has said to himself, thou wilt not require it. Thou hast seen it, for thou hast beheld mischief and vexation, to take it into thy hand. The unfortunate commits himself to thee. Thou hast been the helper of the orphan. Break the arm of the wicked and the evildoer. Seek out his wickedness until thou dost find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. Nations have perished from his land. O Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt strengthen their heart. Thou wilt incline thy ear to vindicate the orphan and the oppressed, that man who is of the earth may cause terror no more. All right. As I mentioned, we'll read a chapter, usually a chapter, and then might skip one. Like I was looking ahead to see how long they were, and I'm not going to read like 50 verses in chapter 18 before we start, because I don't want to take that much time out of class, so we'll probably skip that one, but we'll try to read most of the shorter ones as we go through here. All right, so we are getting back into Revelation here today, or at least our study on Revelation. We haven't actually gotten into the book so much yet. But we've covered a few important things as we're laying the foundation for our study. We've talked about why Revelation is different and what causes the problems with it. That it's a prophetic book. It's the last revelation that God gave to us. And it uses apocalyptic language, which can cause confusion with people. We then went to talk about, we used Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem to talk about apocalyptic language and how that relates to Revelation, which it doesn't really relate to Revelation, but people often do relate it to it, and that's something of import there. Then we got into just talking about, what are the general things about the book? Who wrote it? John wrote it. When did he write it? During a time of at least some Roman persecution, whether it was at, there was levels. So it was at a time, but it was during a time where there was going to be persecution of the church there under Rome. We talked about the dating of it, that generally 81 to 96. Some give a little later date. I think Charles likes to give it a little later date than that. But somewhere in that time period, toward the end of Domitian's reign in Rome. So that's important. And then last week we talked about what was going on around the time that Jesus was born. Actually, just basically how Rome became involved in Jewish affairs. Around the time leading up to Jesus' birth, and then as the church was starting. And specifically, we got into, what was the problem that Rome had with Christians. And we talked about the three tests that they would apply, and how what was going on, what would they have a problem with. And the big thing, of course, eventually became emperor worship under Rome, and that the Christians would refuse to call the emperor Lord. And also there were other things that were brought into that would cause problems. So that's pretty much where we had gotten to. So with all that, let's get into a little bit more on just the background of the book and getting into some important things about the study here. Question, what do you think, those of you who are familiar with it, those of you who aren't, what do you think is the main theme of the book of Revelation?
Straighten up.
Straighten up.
And trust in the hope that we have.
Trust in the hope. Trust in the hope that we have of
Heaven, salvation.
Salvation, heaven, yep.
You have to know what's going to happen before it happens. Instead of it going to happen. Get your ducks in a row.
Get your ducks in a row, okay. Repent. All right, so I think the way that I would put it is that the main theme would be comfort in the knowledge that God's people will have the ultimate triumph. Victory is certain. I think we kind of talked about that. In general terms, it is written as an encouragement to the Christians that were going through or about to go through persecution. It provides a message of victory over evil. Jesus mentions he who overcomes, or some form of that phrase, to every church that he addresses in chapters 2 and 3. So overcoming is a central theme. I'm going to read a couple, and I debated about reading the one here thing is pretty long, but you won't read it unless I read it to you, so it'd probably be good to read this. But first, this is a short one. So this is, I told you that I'm using some material from a class that I was able to attend way back in 1995 in Trenton, Tennessee, that Steve Rook taught. And here's just a letter that he wrote kind of as a start to this. It says, "The purpose of the book of Revelation is observed and understood in view of those first century Christians' condition and need. They were threatened and persecuted. Their need was comfort and assurance. Christ's purpose in the Revelation is to show by apocalyptic symbols that so great a power as Rome was destined to be destroyed, that ultimately God's kingdom would triumph and God's people would be victorious. The purpose is to present a ringing call to those threatened and persecuted Christians and to maintain loyalty to Christ at all costs, even in the face of great suffering, even death. This message is so applicable today, the call to choose the spiritual over the material, the eternal rather than the temporal, to resist temptation, to refuse to compromise with the spirit of the age, the world, to place the claims of conscience above all demands against it, to cherish the confidence of ultimate victory for the kingdom of God." So that's how he summarized what he felt like was going on in the book and was introducing it. We got problems?
Yeah, it keeps asking me to keep talking.
All right, and then the other introduction that I wanted to read, and this is a lengthier one, is out of Jim McGuigan's book on Revelation, and he wrote a foreword to it. Like I said, it's a little long, and I debated whether to read it or not, but I think it conveys some good points. And what, if in a class like this, what's the point if we don't get into some of this sort of stuff, right? So here's his foreword. Revelation has one grand thrust: comfort in the knowledge of ultimate triumph. It has a historical setting and deals with historical events. It is Rome against the church. It is Satan against Jesus. The principles involved in the book, the principles of good and evil, are timeless. Truth will triumph whether in the first centuries or in these. Evil will wage an unceasing war with truth. The record of the victory of the Church of God over Rome stands for all time as a token of its deathlessness, of the supremacy of its Lord, the truth of its doctrines, the strength of its hope, and the reality of its joys. You must not think, my friends, that Christianity has come down to our times without a struggle. Nay, indeed, it took the nation, and I guess I should say, right here where I just started, you must not think, it's indented, so this is a quote from somebody else here. You must not think, my friends, that Christianity has come down to our times without a struggle. Nay, indeed, it took the nation at first by the irresistible force of its evidence. It was opposed by consolidated ranks of well-disciplined foes. Learned, cunning, bold, and powerful were its enemies. But experience taught them it was not only foolish, but hurtful to kick against the goads. The era of Christianity itself presents a very sublime spectacle, the whole world reposing under the protecting wings of the most august of the Caesars. Peace, universal peace, with her healthful arms encircling all the nations. Polytheism, with her myriads of temples and her myriads of priests, triumphantly seated in the affections of a superstitious people, and swaying a magic scepter from the Tiber to the ends of the earth. Legislatures, magistrates, philosophers, orators, and poets all combined to plead her cause and to protect her from insult and injury. Rivers of sacrificial blood crimsoned all the rites of pagan worship, and clouds of incense arose from every city, town, and hamlet in honor of the gods of Roman superstition. When idolatry was at its zenith in the pagan world, the Star of Bethlehem appeared, idolatry on the throne, and the founder of a new religion and a new empire lying in a manger. And after 30 years of obscurity, we find him surrounded, a contemptible group. In the midst of them, he uttered the most incredible oracle ever heard. I am about, says he, to found a new empire on the acknowledgement of a single truth, a truth too which one of you has discovered, and all the powers of malice of worlds seen and unseen shall never prevail against it. What a scene presents itself here? A pusillanimous, wavering, ignorant, and timid dozen of individuals without a penny apiece, assured that to them it pleased the ruler of the universe to give the empire of the world. Such were the armies of faith. They begin their career under the jealous eyes of a haughty Sanhedrin at home, under the strict cognizance of a Roman emperor abroad. They commence their operations. One while charged with idolatry, at another with treason, reviled and persecuted until their chief is rewarded with a cross, and themselves with threats and imprisonment. A throne is a future world animated them, and a crown of glory after martyrdom stimulated them. On they march from conquest to conquest, till not only a multitude of the Jewish priests and people, but Caesar's household and imperial Rome became obedient to the faith. The land of Judea is smitten with the sword of the Spirit. Jerusalem falls and Samaria is taken. The coast of Asia, maritime cities, islands, and provinces vow allegiance to a crucified king. Mighty Rome is roused and shaken and affrighted. Sacrifices are unbought, altars molder, and temples decay. Her pontiffs, her senate, and her emperor stand aghast. Persecution unsheaths her sword and kindles her fires. But the scheme soon defeats itself, for 'tis found that the blood and ashes of the martyrs are the seeds of the church. So the battle is fought till every town of note, from the Tiber to the Thames, from the Euphrates to the Ganges, bows to the cross. On the one side, superstition and the sword. On the other, almighty truth alone pushes on the combat. Under these fearful odds, the truth triumphs. And shall the advocates of such a cause fear the contest now? Yes, my fellow citizens, not a king nor a priest smiled upon our faith until it won that day. Okay, now it's back to what McGuigan's saying here. He says, wish I'd said that. Alexander Campbell said it in the beginning of his debate with the infidel Owen. I like the spirit of the quote. I especially like the question, the challenge really, and shall the advocates of such a cause fear the contest now? The painting huddled flock, whose only crime was Christ, whipped an indignant world to a standstill. And that's what Jesus told them in Revelation they could do. That's its message for you and me today. I think this commentary can help you. I'm not expecting you to agree with me on every point. I think we kind of talked about that. To tell the truth, I'm not sure I agree with me on every point. The text I followed was the American Standard Version. I put the questions before the comments. Okay, so anyway, now he goes on to just talk about how he's going to lay out the commentary and everything. So anyway, so he starts off his this commentary with a quote from Alexander Campbell about basically what was going on when the church came into existence, when Christ was born, kind of like what we've been talking about, and then how that's relevant to us today, that if they could go under such circumstances and be faithful, what does that mean for us? It's kind of the way I interpret what he was saying there. So that's really of import, I think, as we once again lay the foundation here, that what was going on, the situation with Rome was really the big thing going on and what Revelation is addressing. All right, so do we have our backing fixed here, hopefully? All right, so what I want to do next is just talk about what are the common approaches to approaching Revelation. I want to just lay this out so that everybody's kind of familiar with them. I'm not going to get big into them and really like deep into any of the stuff. We're just going to do a real quick overview of what the different ways of interpreting it are. Before I have Dave put that up on the board, the slide that I have for that, you guys know what are the different ways that people think or interpret Revelation?
A lot of people think of it as the end of the earth.
Okay, so
And the
end of time, which would be what if you're starting with the last one there, as far as what I would go through, but that would be considered a futurist view, maybe would be what you would call that. So people look at it as still prophesying things to come that haven't happened yet, like they're looking at current events and what they think are future events and looking for these prophecies to be fulfilled. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more. The first one that I had come across, before I let you guys do a couple more here, is the idealist, if I can say that right. I'm horrible at pronouncing things. Idealist or symbolic view. And that sees Revelation as non-historical. The idealist view holds that Revelation is intended to inspire courage in the church throughout the ages by showing the struggle between good and evil. So it holds that there's no specific events being predicted, no prophecy per se, but that it's meant to be more of a representation to encourage the church throughout all generations. Now, I have a couple things to say about that, but we'll wait till a little later on that. So we talked about, so there's the idealist view, where it doesn't really represent anything specific, any event, but it just is a generality. You have the futurist view that looks at it as being something that hasn't happened yet. It's still in the future. What other views are there? All right, I'll tell you. On the other side of the idealist view is what would be called a continuous historical view. Dave, you can go ahead and put those up then, and we'll kind of talk about them here. The continuous historical view sees continuous fulfillment throughout history. So the prophecies would begin to be fulfilled in John's time and would continue to be fulfilled until Christ's return. It holds that the visions are symbolic events of history. So this could include persecution by the church in Rome, of the church by Rome, the fall of Rome, the rise of Islam, the rise of the Catholic Church, the Reformation, and so on. So you see here, there's the kind of a summary of the four main ways here. So we've talked about idealist, futurist, and historist. There's also another take on the historical view of Revelation that sees the primary fulfillment of the prophecies in John's time, and then some application through later history, and then some fulfillment when Jesus returns. So I guess in order to try to kind of define the differences, because within those four, there's a lot of differences within each of those. Like, people might be a historist, but they might have a totally different view than another historist. To try to define those nuances within this method, you could say that some believe the prophecy started being fulfilled shortly after John wrote the book. They would be fulfilled throughout the rest of time. So it would be an ongoing thing throughout the rest of time. Others might say that most of the prophecies were fulfilled in John's time, shortly thereafter, with a little bit to be fulfilled at the end of time. But then others were saying, like, it kind of changes as history goes. So, that would require that the interpretation of the symbols change as time and different events occur. The other one that we haven't mentioned yet is the preterist, the very first one up there. The preterist, and I don't even know how, there again, I'm probably not saying that right. Preterist. Pre meaning compared to others, I think that these things have already happened. So the preterist approach says that prophecies in it have been fulfilled already. They're all complete. Here again, there are some different views that people would have. Some people would say that the ones who put that really early date on the writing would say that it was completed whenever Jerusalem was destroyed. There are those that believe the prophecies relate to the persecution, like what and I think you probably can tell this is what I tend to believe, is that under Rome, that the persecution under Rome. There are those that believe prophecies relate to the link between Rome and the Catholic Church. There was a persecution that came up of evangelical Christians or Protestants under Catholicism. So that there are those that believe that, because when did the Catholic Church actually come into existence? I did a little research on that in prep for this class.
Like 300 AD, something like that.
Well, Constantine kind of started that, but it wasn't, I don't think it was official. At least, I'm not sure, but yeah, Constantine was kind of the start of that, but then I think it became official under Pope Gregory in AD 590, and then it was like in 1100 or something when the conquests, and the Catholic Church started trying to violently force people into that religion, and I'm sure there was stuff happened in between there, but anyway, so that it kind of goes along that. But so I think the Catholic Church officially was 590 maybe, but if you look at the Catholic Church's stuff, they say AD 30, which makes sense because they would go back to Jesus just like we do, right? So but I think, as I said, as far as a body, I think it was 590 was the official, but it started with Constantine in 3 something, I forget what. 326.
Constantine actually made himself pope.
Right, yes.
So, again, the official organization actually started under Constantine. They just perfected it over time.
Oh, yeah, as it went on, yeah. All right. And then, this is the people that kind of fall between the preterist and the historist. There are those who believe the prophecies have been fulfilled except for those recorded in chapter 21 and 22. When we get into it, you'll see what I think on that. But 21 and 22 are interesting a little bit whenever you get into this, but I don't think that they're necessarily prophesying about heaven. Some people who would be classified as preterists still believe that 21 and 22 are prophesying about heaven. I actually think, and we'll get into this a lot more, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I actually think that it's more like heaven is being used as a picture of what's being prophesied, not so much that it's prophesying about heaven. Like it's using a picture to illustrate things, but we got to lay some more work before we get into that too much. But anyway, that's just my thought on it. Okay, and then the futurist view that Terry brought up. That says that most of the prophecies in Revelation have yet to be fulfilled. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the different pieces of this approach. Yeah. What's the most common phrase associated with that? I don't think it's up there with the futurist approach.
Phrase or what, like?
Word or phrase, yeah.
Armageddon.
What's that? Apocalypse.
Armageddon.
Okay, that wasn't quite what I was looking for, but yeah, those are. We'll have those up there. Yep. Premillennialism, right? What's premillennialism?
You realize if you ask most people that in the world, they don't know.
Right. It's a way of looking at Revelation, saying that there's going to be a literal 1,000-year reign, right? And here on earth. And so there's a lot of things associated with that come out of these prophecies and what they're looking for and all those kind of things. So that's kind of the foundation of what we're going through. Now then, I don't know, how many people are familiar with the Left Behind series? Okay, that 700 Club.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of things that go with that. Now then, I think it makes for some pretty good science fiction movies and things like that. But I think it also causes a lot of confusion for people and worry that they don't need to necessarily have. All right, so Dave, go ahead and let's put up some the terms associated with premillennialism here. Like I said, I don't want to go deep into this. I don't want to go real far into this, but just so you have a feel for what people are what are things that are along with this. Amillennialism, a belief that the 1,000 years is not a literal reign of Christ on earth, but is symbolic. So some of these terms are things associated with premillennialism, or some of them are opposite or whatever. But so these are terms. Armageddon, those of you familiar, I think somebody said Armageddon. Place mentioned in Revelation at the scene of a battle. Premillennialists claim that this battle will be a great victory over the Antichrist and will precede the rapture. So a real physical battle. Dispensationalism, a distinctively peculiar form of premillennialism, which is recent. vocal and more estranged from the biblical truth. Now, this was written back in like the 90s, and that's something that's interesting about premillennialism and the futurist view. I remember what was being said when I was a kid about things that were going to happen, and these things have to keep changing. Why is that?
Because the future keeps.
Yeah, because things keep changing, right? So whenever they're looking and they're saying, Russia is this represents Russia or whatever, like these things have to keep changing because it keeps changing. Just like people who are predicting the end of the world, and they say it's going to happen here, and it has to change because it didn't happen at this point. So that these things keep changing. Imminent, term used by millennialists to indicate that the Lord's second coming is impending and immediate. Postmillennialism, doctrine that millennium will precede Christ's second coming. And you go on with all these different premillennialism and all that. Scroll down just a little bit there. And yeah, there's a couple, premillennialism, a doctrine teaching that Christ's second coming will precede an earthly 1,000-year reign by Christ. Rapture, a period of bliss for the resurrected saints as they go to meet Christ in the air for the revelation. You've heard that one quite frequently, right? The rapture. The tribulation's another big one, a period of woe and trouble on earth for wicked and others which last while the saints are participating in the rapture and the revelation. So there's a lot of stuff with all of this. I just wanted to kind of bring those out. Those are the different ways and things. Rapture, we talked about, the 1,000-year reign, then the rapture. That's part of it. Another part of it is the establishment of an earthly kingdom here again on earth. There's the attempt to attach current events and looking for signs that these things are about to happen. Another big part of this, Israel. A lot of people that do this, the futurist view or the premillennialist view, believe that Israel has to be reestablished as a nation, right? And that it plays an important role in all of these events. A lot of people a lot of politicians in the world believe that. That was part of why Israel was reestablished back in 40s, yeah, back over half a century ago, almost 3/4 of a century ago, I guess now. So that all those things play into that. Now then, like I said, I don't want to go deep into anything or go too strong into these parts, but those first 4 methods of interpretation that we talked about, well, I guess I didn't do it in order, so whenever I wrote these notes, it was supposed to be in order. But so you're talking idealists, the couple of different historists, and the preterists. A lot of the interpretation of Revelation is the same between them. Maybe not the exact same events, but a lot of the interpretation is. The last method has a very different interpretation, and as we noted, it's very common in today's churches, and especially in America, right? And this is where I'll give you just my opinion here on some of this. I believe the idealist, historical, and futurist methods that we discussed all have some problems when you start to look at them. The problem with the idealist method is that its premise seems to contradict what the author says. We remember we talked about, well, what are some principles that need to be applied as we go through this study? Well, you got to take what the author says, and the author says that this is a revelation. What's a revelation? It's a prophecy concerning things to happen, right? So there's nothing wrong with viewing Revelation as an encouragement for Christians in the overcoming of evil, which is what this theory kind of encourages. But the main problem is that Revelation claims to be a prophecy, and you can't separate prophecy from history. It's fulfilled in history. So that's a pretty major problem with viewing it that way, saying that there's nothing specific happening with it. The historical method, at least parts of that view, I think would have a problem in that it indicates that some of the prophecies would change with time, as if it's not a specific event. Same kind of problem that you have with the idealist view. It's not a true prophecy. I don't think that's indicated by the text. And in some cases, it indicates that prophecies haven't been fulfilled yet, which, as I mentioned, you'll find as I go through this and with thinking of it as being Rome that it's referring to, I believe that the prophecies have been fulfilled. And we'll get into that here in well, we may not get into it much today, but we'll get into it in just a little bit. And then the problem with the futurist method, here again, the first thing, going back to our principles, I think it conflicts with other clearly spoken scriptures. Like whenever you start trying to talk about signs that have to come before Jesus' return and all of these kind of things, I think you're contradicting things that have been clearly spoken in other texts. So that's the first big problem with it. Also, it contradicts what the author says here again when the author says these things are to come to pass shortly, and then it says they haven't even started happening yet. So that's a big thing. So that's what we're going to discuss. I don't know how much we'll get into it here because I want to lay some pretty good groundwork on it. But so when are the prophecies to be fulfilled? I just gave you the answer according to John, right? Short time period, right? Okay, so there are many people out there that are still looking for future fulfillment of Revelation. They are looking for those things that we discussed just recently here, dealing with premillennialism, the rapture, tribulation, the 1,000-year reign, the battle of Armageddon, all of those kind of things. So to answer the question of when these events that were prophesied were to take place, I think you can use some questions. We can ask some questions ourselves. First, look at the context. Revelation meant something to the people that it was written to, the people of John's day, right? It wasn't written just to get to us, for us to look at. We have a tendency to do that, right? We look at it and it's like it was just written for us. But that's not, it was written to Christians for all time, right? Starting with the people of John's day. So we must understand it in light of its historical background and their situation. So we're looking back on this after it's completed. Like we've seen what happened, but they were written, it was written to them in the time it was happening. So it needs to be put in that proper backdrop. All right, so who wrote it? It was John. Who was it written to? Christians that were in Asia in the time of Roman persecution, right? All right, so let's go. We're gonna actually read out of Revelation now. All right, Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Does one of you guys back there want to read that one?
Yeah, Revelation 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And he sent and communicated by his angel to his bondservant John, who testifies to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for time is near.
Okay, so John opening this up tells us exactly what's happening here. Jesus gives him a revelation to things which must shortly take place by way of his angel. And then at the end of verse 3, for the time is near. So these things are to come to pass soon. What do you think those words would mean to those who read it shortly after John wrote it? Are they thinking now? Yeah. Or are they thinking it might happen 2,000 years from now? No, I think they were thinking pretty soon, right? What does that mean to you when somebody says it's going to come to happen shortly?
Better get ready.
Yeah, you better get ready because it's coming soon, right? So that's part of it. But here's the kicker. Not only does the book say that these things are to come to pass soon in the first chapter, at the beginning of the vision, if the book just started off saying that these things would take place soon, you might be able to say, well, maybe they're going to start happening soon, but that historic view, but they're going to continue happening on and on and on, right? But let's go to chapter 22 and verses 6 and 10. And if one of you guys wants to read those.
These words are faithful and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. In verse 10, and he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near.
Okay, so we just went through, there, we're done with Revelation, right? We did the beginning, we did the end. So he just went through all this Revelation and then comes back at the end and says, these things are going to happen soon. Don't seal up the prophecy. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that actually is from the Old Testament as well. There was a place where the prophet was told to seal up the prophecy because it wasn't going to happen soon. So we'll go back and look at that here probably next week. But if someone starts off telling you, hey, this is about to happen, and then they finish up by telling you, hey, you better get ready because this is about to happen, would you think that whatever they had told you was a long way off? Nope. Would you think that it was going to, maybe start to happen and then the rest of it was going to happen a long time later? I wouldn't. I think that it's all going to happen in a fairly short period of time. So the placement of these statements would indicate to me that everything that John saw was about to happen in the not too distant future. All right, we got a couple minutes. We'll finish up with this. But some people might want to say, well, what about 2 Peter 3:8? What does 2 Peter 3:8 say? One of you guys want to read that?
Do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that the Lord one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day.
Okay, so have you ever heard anybody use this passage to say, well, God might say something like in a time and it doesn't mean what we think it means because time doesn't mean the same thing to God? I've heard that for two main arguments, right? One is to support the theory of evolution, where it talks about a day, he created it in a day. And so, well, maybe that day was thousands of years because, it took God, he did it that way to try to coincide with evolution. So I've heard it talked about that way. And then also I've heard it to use for Revelation where it says, well, the time is supposed to be short, but that could be however long because God, time doesn't mean anything to God and God exists outside of time. The premise of the argument is true in that God exists outside of time and time doesn't mean anything to God. But who's God speaking to here? Is he speaking to himself? No. And when God speaks to people, he uses terms the way that we use them, not in the way that people are trying to apply that. So I think that whenever he's saying, emphasizing, not just saying, it's emphasized that the time is short, the time is at hand, it's near. Whenever we see that, we can have confidence that's what's happening. All right, so we're just about out of time. Just a little more food for thought, and then we'll get into a little bit more of how shortly or near at hand or those kind of phrases are used in the Bible. But the word shortly, I use the New American Standard, but the King James Version only has the term shortly in it like 15 times. There's not a lot of times. You can get a concordance, King James concordance, look it up. Quickly, the term quickly is found a little more often in it. But anyway, so I think if we go back and look at those verses that talk about shortly, which we'll look at some of them, you can see that it means things are going to happen quickly, relatively quick time. So that's where we'll pick up next week and just once again talk about what that term means. And then